The products were produced more and more, but there was no demand for the product, and how to sell that one? They were struggling like anything. The government has received the tax 30,000 a year and 24,000 a year. For the same commodity, they collected tax at 54,000 because at different stages in the new rules and regulations, they start whatever the VAT was introduced, they kept certain taxes outside the VAT. Only certain items were taken into consideration in the VAT. Warm welcome to 6th Sem BBA student. The subject we are discussing goods and services tax. In our previous session, we have just discussed what is tax and what was the Indian tax structure we have and how many types of taxes we have here, like direct tax and indirect tax. What do you mean by direct tax and indirect tax? These concepts we have discussed in our previous session. I am Professor Rajesh L.R. from Department of Commerce and Management from Vidhyaashram First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. In our previous session, we had a discussion on direct tax, indirect tax, and the differences, whatever we have here, features of Indian tax structure, and even the features of indirect taxes. And the tax structure in India is divided in two parts. One is direct and the other one is indirect, and the brief history of indirect tax in India. These are the concepts what we have discussed in our previous session. And in today's session, the agenda is very simple. When was excise duty was introduced and how customs duty came into existence and why they introduced customs duty, and what were the issues was there in the taxation, indirect tax concepts in our country, and what made India to bring the VAT, value added tax module, to the concept and make it in reality to have one nation, one tax. This was a concept which was thought at the time of VAT, but it couldn't happen at that time, and later they started to have the concept called GST, Goods and Services Tax, which was introduced in 2017 with the concept of one nation, one tax. This was successful and it is more benefited for all the people in India, and even for the manufacturer or a common person or a business person, for all it is benefited. So we are going to discuss how the journey was started and ended till the introduction of GST in the Indian market. The first concept what we have here, why the excise duty came and how it came. After Industrial Revolution in the mid of 1857, where the industry started to grow in the market and they started to use the machineries to convert the raw material into finished goods. And in our Indian market, majority of the goods was sold by the British people, and it was a machine-made products was there. And see, production increased to such a level that manufacturers found it challenging to sell their products as there was no demand. The products were produced more and more, but there was no demand for the product, and how to sell that one? They were struggling like anything. So the British government, they thought that when in this situation, they start to sell British products in the colonial Indian market. For that, what they made, they would soon came into competitive with India's domestic clothing and textile market. Moreover, British products were much more expensive than garments. So why would people buy them? So the concept was in such a way that when Indian government, they started to produce the khadi cloths for the people, and they started to produce the products and sell it in the man-made concepts. But majority of the people, they thought that when it is good and it is better to support the Indian people. But later, the British government thought that when in such a way to resolve this problem, the British authorities came up with new idea. Very first time in India, they started indirect tax with the concept of excise duty. This would bring prices of Indian handmade products at par with British machine manufactured garments and cloths. So if I start levying excise duty on the commodities, automatically the Indian products value will be reduced here, and automatically our products will be increased, the prices will be better, and even it is good for the people. And even some of the people, they thought that when Indian khadi industry is suffering massive losses, consumer opted for the finer machine manufactured cloths. Some of the people, they thought that when instead of man-made products, that is handmade product, they want to have machine-made products. For this reason, they started to support to buy the machine manufactured cloths. It was an important reason behind rising the popularity of India's Swadeshi movement. Because of this, the government started India Swadeshi movement. This was the major concept why this movement came to the part. After getting independence, the Indian government thought that when to introduce customs duty, a tax imposed on imported goods, protect Indian products across all sectors, but the excise duty was remained in the market. With excise duty, they started to have one more duty called customs duty. The reason behind its introduction was to preserve the Indian forex reserve, that if it is dropped below 100 crores in 1965, Government of India raised the import duties. Because of certain concepts, they want to maintain some forex reserves. For that reason, they thought that when to have the new type of duties, and they introduced the customs duty. When experts saw that situation was far from improvement, it issued a mandate that only essential items could be imported. They thought that one not to import all the commodities here, so we can give permission to bring certain products from outside which are essential for the requirement in the present scenario. In that concept, they started. Due to this restriction, excise duties became all the more important than customs duty. For this reason, excise duty became more important rather than the customs duties. With an increase in its revenue requirement, the government had widened the tax base. More goods were taxed at higher rates. Some of the goods they started to charge at high rate policies, and they started to collect the revenue for the government to take care of the expenditure, the welfare, public expenditure. For that reason, they started to collect the huge amount of tax from the public. Initially, the focus was on the raw materials, like, for example, on the steel and intermediate goods like steel sheets. On these products, they started to levy more rates, and they started to collect the tax on these products. Gradually, taxes were levied on consumer goods also. Later, even they started to collect taxes on the consumer goods also. For this reason, they gave the permission for the state government, and even they started to collect in the form of sales tax, road tax, and liquor tax. These are the three taxes they started to collect from the public. First one was sales tax. If I'm selling any commodity or if I'm selling any goods, I have to collect the tax from the public, the consumers, and I have to pay the tax to the government here. And in the same way, they started to collect the road tax and liquor tax. And municipal bodies, they started to collect the concept of tax in the form of octroi for the betterment of the society. Given below are some reasons for these changes, why they started, and what was the purpose it made to change the concepts. The concept is very simple here. Collecting taxes from 4 to 5 steel manufacturers is much more manageable than 25,000 steel utensil manufacturers. They said that one, instead of collecting only from the 4 or 5 people, let us do one thing, let us collect tax from all the people, so it is better for the government as well as for the increase in the welfare of the society. People may consider payment of finished good tax to be physiologically painful. They may think that one, it may be painful for them, but it is benefit for them only. And later they realized why the tax was introduced even on goods as well as services. The situation stood at this: the central and the state government levied taxes on production, sales, instead of value addition. They were on a ad valorem basis. For example here, if I'm purchasing a commodity for 2 lakhs, if I'm a manufacturer, where I'm purchasing the product raw materials at 2 lakhs, where I have to pay for that one tax at 15%. So 2 lakh into 15% means 30,000. So 15% on 2 lakh. So 2 lakh 30 will be raw material cost for me. See here, the raw material cost was 2 lakhs, where I had to pay tax for that 30,000 and I had to procure. After conversion, when I sell that to the wholesaler, I was collecting 10%, where I've added profit for this one 10,000. So now it will be 2,40,000. 2,40,000, add tax 10%, that is 24,000. So now the value will be 2,64,000. Now the government has received the tax 30,000 year and 24,000 year. For the same commodity, they collected tax at 54,000 because at different stages. First stage was at the stage of raw material, and the second stage at the stage of selling to the wholesaler, and then again the retailer was collecting the tax, and then even the consumer was paying tax here. So now for the same commodity, the consumer was paying 4 times taxes to the government here for the same commodity at 4 different levels. To control all this level only, the subject concept of one nation, one tax, GST, was introduced in 2017. Issue. What was the issue we had? Let us stop and take into account 2 important concepts here. Tax on tax. See, already the tax was levied. Already we have seen in our previous slide here. See, already we have levied the tax here. Again, we are levying the tax over here. So tax on tax, it has become here. Instead of that one, tax on tax, addition of taxes at every stage is called cascading, and interest on interest is called compounding. See, interest on interest is called compounding. Tax on tax is called cascading. For this reason, they thought that one, and this has created more issues in the market. People started thinking that when the government is charging more, and the burden was falling on the consumer to buy the product at lesser price. Instead of lesser price, they were paying at more price to buy a small commodity also. Tax rates were formulated depending on the revenues of the government needed. See, based on the state government requirement, they started to collect the taxes in the state, and in each and every state, the tax rates were different, and the procedure was different, and the rules and regulation was totally different. And the situation where even some luxury goods could be tax-free. In certain states, the goods were luxury goods also. They made it as a tax-free goods. Business could not claim tax relief or credits for the tax that they've already paid. The business people who have paid at the time of purchasing the raw materials taxes, so for they couldn't get the benefit of getting back the tax amount, they started to levy taxes and earn more money in other concepts. As states at different tax rates, often business owners would purchase raw materials from a state with low tax rates and sell their items at a high tax rate. As I said, the business started to think in a different way. They started to purchase the raw materials from a place where the taxes are very less, and they started to sell their products where they can collect more taxes. If I'm paying tax here 1,000, let me collect tax at 10,000. So this concept was introduced in the minds of the business, and they started in a different way of thinking. India adopts the VAT module. VAT model is nothing but value added tax. This concept was introduced in Indian market to reduce the burden or the tax on tax for the people here. This was a major concept why they introduced VAT. Now, instead of paying tax now here, for example, I have purchased a commodity for 1,000 rupees. The tax will be a 10%. So it will be 100. So how much I paid here? 1,100 is the value. When I sell this one for adding another 100 rupees here, 1,200. Now, when I want to collect tax, here, the 10%, like 120 will be the year. So it will be 1,320. See, now he makes a shirt and sells it off to a retailer 1,000. No, if VAT is 10%, the cloth maker will have to pay 50 only as a tax instead of rupees 100 on the entire transaction value. In this way, VAT model addresses the problem of cascading. See, instead of paying tax 100 year and again 120 year, so let us do one thing. Let us pay at one time and reduce the burden for the consumers as well as for the business people also, and get benefited for the businesses. While VAT sought to reduce the consumer's tax burden and transform India into a single market and lower tax revenues of the government, and there was a loss was started in the states and in the country also. For that, other local taxes were kept separate from the new regime. It means in the new rules and regulations, they start whatever the VAT was introduced, they kept certain taxes outside the VAT. Only certain items were taken into consideration in the VAT. However, this measure defeated the most important purpose of VAT, which was one nation, one tax. The states charged their own taxes. Interstate taxes were not levied, and there were many different tax rates all over India. So, depending upon the state transaction and the turnover and the economical position and the requirement, they started to collect the taxes at different rates, and there was no tax on the interstate. There was intrastate relation was very bad, and even the rates were huge, and it was becoming problem for the consumers to buy the commodities. So now, keeping all these things in the mind, the GST was introduced in Indian market to have one market where one tax will be paid for the goods and not at the every stage where it moves from one place to other place, where the tax has to be paid by the consumer only. Earlier also it was the same thing, but the consumer was paying more tax. That was tax on tax he was paying. Now they have reduced that one, and they got benefited for the manufacturer, wholesaler, retailer, and even the prices have been reduced after introducing the GST, which has benefited for all the people. If they get the concept of GST, what is GST, why and how it supported our day-to-day life, means if they understood these things, definitely they'll get that one, what benefit they gained in the market, what was the price I was paying earlier and what is the price I'm paying now. And even it reduced other concepts of black marketing and other concepts in the Indian society, which supported after introducing GST to the nation. The cascading effect of indirect taxes addresses somewhat. India was far from formulating its goal of becoming single market. Gradually, after a lot of political negotiations, the GST was introduced in the country on 1st July 2017. When they introduced GST, it was introduced on 1st July 2017. GST created a unified tax system by merging 17 taxes into a single tax structure. Means 17 taxes are merged and they made one tax, that is GST. Like for example, state tax which was merged, major we have taken here, octroi, entry tax, VAT, purchase tax, luxury tax. All these were merged to the GST. Excise duty, central sales tax, service tax. This was merged to GST. Like luxury tax, octroi and entry tax, purchase tax, entertainment tax, tax on lottery, VAT of state taxes which was merged into GST, excise duty, customs duty, central state tax, service tax. This was merged to GST. These are the major taxes we have mentioned here, and these taxes merged together and they started to have one tax called GST. See how the GST was started. When it was started in the year 2000, they formed a GST committee. Goods and Services Tax Committee was formed in 2000. In 2003, Vijay Kelkar task force formed. So, task force was formed to collect certain information from the market and how it is going to be benefited. They started to collect all the informations and how it can be benefited for the manufacturer, to the state, to the country and for all the people, how the impact will be there to the manufacturer, or it may be to the wholesaler, to the retailer, or the central government or state government, everything it was started to collect that one. And in 2006, GST announced by the finance minister. The finance minister announced that the new concept we want to introduce it in the year 2006 only. In 2008, GST model finalized by Empowered Committee. The Empowered Committee which was framed, they finalized what should be there in the GST like CGST, SGST, IGST, and later they started UTGST. In 2009, release of the first discussing paper. Whatever they have discussed and finalized in the committee, that document was released in the year 2009. In 2011, the 115th Constitution Amendment Bill. 2012-13, the Standing Committee discussed the GST bill and submitted its report to the Parliament. In 2014, the 112th Constitution Amendment Bill was passed based on the 115, and in 2015, Lok Sabha clears the GST bill. In 2016, Rajya Sabha clears the GST bill. First, it was in the state and then it was in the central. In both the places, the bill was finalized, and late on 1st July 2017, the GST was introduced in Indian market. Thank you to all our 6M BBA students. This was the which we had in our Unit 1, where we have studied the tax concepts and direct tax, indirect tax, and the journey of GST from the year 2000 till today, how it traveled and what it has made and how it got successed and why it was introduced. Earlier, what type of taxes we had, we have discussed everything here. So go through that one. Namaste to all our 6M BBA students.